I'll come right out and say it. I believe that everyone is wrong about the Roaring Knight. Ever since we heard about this enigmatic figure in Deltarune Chapter 1, but especially after Chapter 2, the Deltarune theorizing community has been obsessed over figuring out who the Roaring Knight is. There are quite a few tantalizing candidates that have, over time, been narrowed down thanks to Chapters 3, 4, and 5. As of the end of Chapter 5, there are a few stronger candidates, namely Des, and to a lesser extent Rudy and Carol. Unfortunately, no matter which holiday you look at, there's always room to doubt, and too many things that don't make any sense, or pieces of evidence that don't feel like they match, or that feel like a stretch. And yet, despite how important the Knight is to the overall narrative, I feel like we still haven't figured out who the Knight is. It feels impossible to answer that one simple question. The question of, who is the Roaring Knight? After considering this, I came up with two possibilities. Possibility 1. The Roaring Knight is not a character we know, and therefore cannot be predicted. I gave this thought about 10 seconds of time before tossing it in the garbage. We are 5/7 of the way through the game, and introducing a new character to an already massive cast this late seems like a strange decision. While it's not out of the question for Toby to introduce such an important character like this, heck, he did it in Undertale with Asriel. I firmly believe that the Roaring Knight's identity has already been hinted at. Possibility 2, however, was much more interesting. Are we asking the wrong question about the Roaring Knight? Perhaps the question isn't who is the Roaring Knight, but rather, what is the Roaring Knight? If the Roaring Knight is not necessarily a person, but instead a thing, then we've been looking at it wrong all this time. And after pondering this new line of thinking relentlessly since Chapter 5's release, I think I've found the answer. I won't bury the lead any longer. I'll share my conclusion first, and then prove it. I contend that the Roaring Knight is a curse, a horrible beast with unfathomable power, a monster with a human soul. But it's not just any monster, and it's not just any human soul. I believe that the Roaring Knight is December Holiday's soulless body, merged with Kris's original human soul. A horrific, cursed existence born of a single desire, held by two desperate beings, to find her. To find Des's soul, and to be reunited with her, no matter the cost. Okay, so I know that was a lot to take in all at once. Now that we all know where I'm heading with this, let's take a step back and analyze the game so far. I'll start by looking at the game from an empirical perspective, going over the facts of the case. Second, I'll postulate a rough outline of how I believe this thing could have happened. Finally, I'll go over the literary and thematic implications for this theory to be true. If you guys are enjoying the video so far, please like and subscribe and stick to the end to see my thought process. I love making videos like this, and if you do too, then let me know in the comments below. This video was sponsored by the Hometown Butcher. Fried dough balls of octopus. It's only 2G. It's only for free. Now, let's take a look at the various parts of my Cursed Knight theory, so I can show you guys where I'm coming from here. First, let's start with the less controversial take, that Des is a part of the Knight. The evidence tying Noelle's missing older sister, December Holiday, to the Knight is generally well understood at this point, but I think it's important to cover my bases here. First off, the antlers. Very distinctly, the Roaring Knight has antlers. No matter which way you look at it, this means the Knight has to be at least related to the Holiday family. Sorry, Papyrus Knight fans, it's not happening. The knight is also cocky and confident, seen especially in the scene before it summons a titan in Chapter 4, as it scoffs and laughs at Susie's baseless threats. Additionally, the first attack that the knight uses in its Chapter 3 fight involves a barrage of ice shards, which is extremely important because it's the only attack that every single player of the game will see. Finally, when it initially summons its weapon, it very clearly resembles a bat. A cocky and overconfident Holiday who's related to ice and uses a baseball bat? Who else could it be but December? Baseball might seem out of left field, pun intended, but we know she's related to baseball bats for two reasons. Firstly, in Chapter 1, Noelle mentions Des hit Kris with a wiffle ball bat back in the day, when they were up to no good. And secondly, the wallpaper on Noelle's computer in Chapter 4 can display a picture of Des with a cracked baseball bat. Another thing that ties Des to baseball is the song Raise Up Your Bat, which Tenna directly ties to Des in Deltarune's first ever mention of her full name. Now, this is the part of the video where all of the Des Knighters come to my house and steal all of my furniture. After all, aren't I making things more convoluted by claiming that the knight is only Des's body? Wouldn't it be simpler for the knight to just be Des? I'm looking at the exact same pieces of evidence that the vast array of Des Knighters are looking at. The evidence that seems to point to an obvious solution. Des is the knight, whole and entire. But I have found a problem that lies between the evidence and the conclusion. The problem is in the code. The problem is the lost girl. As many people in the theorizing space know, within the game's code lies unused lines of dialogue that we've been getting every chapter. These lines of dialogue are spoken by somebody who appears to be trapped in the darkness, whose only stimulus outside of their own mind is the sound of scratching, who doesn't even eat or drink anymore. The latest chapter's dialogue is especially striking, and goes as follows. I do have one thing, though, and that's memories. Memories of my life. Maybe that's all I am at this point. A collection of memory. Then all I can do is not forget, right? Don't forget. I just have to keep telling myself that. Based off of countless context clues, such as the song called Lost Girl not explicitly being about Noelle, Asgore's vague post speech at the end of Chapter 5, the song Find Her, found within the 1225 room in TV World, as well as on deltarune.com/Des after clicking her guitar, it is painfully obvious that the lost girl is Des. And I'd argue that she is the character lost within the code. The usage of the phrase, "don't forget," is the final nail in the coffin. Those lyrics are clearly being sung by a female character in the outro of the game's first 3 chapters. And now it seems we finally know who the singer is. It's everyone's favorite lost girl, December Holiday. Now, riddle me this, Batman. How can we construe December to be both the knight, agent of darkness and wreaker of havoc, and the lost girl, hopeless and formless in the dark? As I was pondering about this theory and bouncing it off others, one solution seemed to present itself. The solution was simple. What if it's a simple Jekyll and Hyde situation, in which one character has multiple agencies in a sort of selective amnesia sense? What if, while the knight is aura farming in the dark world, the lost girl is effectively dormant, and while the knight is resting in the shelter or wherever its secret HQ is, the lost girl is awake and effectively trapped, with little stimuli to even remind her that she exists? This is a nice idea on paper, but it doesn't hold up due to two very specific details. Firstly, the Roaring Knight can clearly see in the Dark Worlds, so why can't the Lost Girl? What changes to prevent her from being able to see anything? Secondly is the little stimuli I brought up earlier, the scratching. No matter which way I look at it, the scratching the Lost Girl can hear simply doesn't make sense if the Lost Girl and the Roaring Knight are the same person. If the Lost Girl is trapped inside the Knight's body or whatever, what could the scratching even be? Is it scratching on the outside of the Knight's armor? No matter which way I looked at it, it doesn't seem to make any sense for that to be one of the few details we do know about the Lost Girl's current environment. The only thing that would explain it is this. The Lost Girl and the Roaring Knight aren't experiencing the same things at the same time, because they are two different entities entirely. She is a part of the Knight, yes, but another part of her fills an entirely different role that doesn't fit any other character. The role of the Lost Girl. For this reason, I believe that December's entire being cannot be completely coterminous with the Knight. This leaves us with two possibilities. First, the Knight is not Des. Rudy Knighters win again! Woo! Second, the Knight is only partly Des, and partly someone else. Another character with ties to the Knight, whose traumatic past has slowly been uncovered over the course of the game, and seems to be building to a truly awful reveal. This is the part of the video where we finally address Kris. Besides December, I argue that Kris is the character in the game with the most ties to the Knight. Very notably, the Knight is somehow the only character in the entire game, besides Kris and sometimes Noelle, to wield a sword in the Dark World. In a fantasy setting like this, restricting the usage of the most iconic fantasy weapon to only 2.5 characters feels like an intentional connection. There's also the way the Knight poses, both in battle and out. Others have pointed out the similarities before, but many of the Roaring Knight's poses are nearly one-to-one with Kris. The pointing one is the most egregious, since you see Kris do that exact point all the time when acting. Heck, they even aura farm the same way. The most crucial connection between Kris and the Knight, however, lies in its methodologies. Yes, it has a cocky streak, like Des, but the most interesting aspect of the Roaring Knight's MO is that it is, above all things, extraordinarily patient. Patient, you might ask? Patient how? Simply put, the Knight, despite theoretically being the main antagonist of Deltarune, hardly ever shows up. Or, more accurately, it always waits for the perfect moment, and then strikes. We see this in chapters 3 and 5, where it only shows up in the last 5 minutes of the chapter. And even in chapter 4, despite the fact that it can clearly create a Titan whenever it wants to, patiently waits until the last possible second to do so. This also proves a key factor for the Knight, which is that no matter what it is clearly sentient. It has some sort of plan that it patiently sticks to, rather than thrashing about willy-nilly like an animal. Okay, but why does this matter, you might ask? Why does it matter that the Knight's key defining characteristic is patience? The answer lies in everyone's favorite gremlin from chapter 5, Aqua. I don't think it's a mind-blowing claim to make that Aqua is thematically tied to Kris. The game practically falls all over itself trying to show it. As she says herself, they both wear ribbons, wield knives, and are blue. She's also a mischievous prankster at heart, and based on everything we know about Kris, they used to be quite the troublemaker back in the day. That streak continues to this day, of course, but it seems it was more prominent when they were younger. It would be more accurate to say that Aqua represents a young Kris, the one that Asgore still sees in his mind's eye. This all matters because Aqua's soul trait is patience, even though she herself lacks it. If Kris and Aqua are supposed to be parallels of each other, then that would imply that Kris's soul trait is patience as well, and that their soul is cyan. This would explain why they appear to be blue in the dark world, despite wearing green and yellow in the light world. Additionally, the game has made abundantly clear by now that we, the Red Soul, are not Kris. We are a wholly different individual entirely, with our own wants and desires in existence. As shown throughout the game, but explicitly confirmed in the pink fight, Kris could not live without us, which leads to the implication that they do not currently have their original soul. After all, if Kris did have their own soul, they wouldn't shamble like a zombie without us. All of this leads to a key pressing question. Where the hyperlink blocked is Kris's soul? Ever since chapter 2, I've been pondering this, but as I stated in the intro, I think I've found the answer. Part of that answer lies with Aqua. During the chapter, it's revealed that, like all of the other 7 flowers, she used to be all one color. But she used green's handkerchief and red food coloring to give herself a red, heart-shaped ribbon. This is not an accidental decision, I assure you. If Kris and Aqua truly are parallels, then this means that Kris, the patience human, lost at least part of their patience trait at some point, and got a red trait instead. Since we know Kris doesn't have 2 souls currently, this implies that they lost their soul, and in order to live, they got us as a replacement. How exactly they got a hold of us during the Goner Maker sequence is a whole other can of worms. But the point is that we have a patient soul currently unaccounted for. Or do we? I think that we've already seen where Kris's original soul went. Or rather, what it became. A monster with a human soul. A horrible beast with unfathomable power. This line from Undertale speaks of what happens when a monster absorbs a human soul. We saw the nightmarish result in that game thanks to Omega Flowey, and I believe that we have already seen it again in Deltarune. An awful, cursed existence, a being of great power composed of a monster and a human. As I said before, the only way for Des to be both the knight and the lost girl is for Des to have been split in twain. Her soulless body, part of the knight, and her bodiless soul, the lost girl. While that soul lies in the depths of the world of Deltarune, I believe that her body remains, animated by the power of the only human soul left unaccounted for in Deltarune. Kris's original soul. So, we've gone over all of the facts of the case as thoroughly as possible, but how could something like this have happened? I've stayed as objective as I can throughout the first section, but in order to answer how Curse Knight even came to be, I'll have to jump into the world of the speculative, working with the few pieces of information we do have about the so-called disappearance to piece together the real story. Let's start at the beginning. Lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail, the tail of hell that took crawl, the tail that must not be followed. The poor children. I believe those children were Des, Kris, and perhaps Noelle and Azriel as well. As mentioned by Noelle in Chapter 2, they all used to go exploring when they were kids, and on at least one occasion they explored the forest behind the graveyard. During one of their misadventures, they stumbled across something, or someone, that led them to a dark world, perhaps in the shelter, or perhaps elsewhere. As for who or what this something is, if it has anything to do with the shelter, then it's certainly related to the Sword Route's final boss, Eram, or whatever being or concept Eram represents. Trapped in the Dark World, things turn south incredibly quickly, and through some horrid accident or intentional devious ploy by an entity with incredible power, Des's soul was either lost or taken. As stated by Noelle in Chapter 4, Kris used to prank her by pretending to rip their heart out of their body and chase her around. This implies, to me at least, that Kris already knew they could rip their soul out of their body, even when they were young. How they found out is anyone's guess, but if I'm right, then it explains what happened next. After watching Des's soul get ripped out of her body, Kris is stricken with incredible guilt, and young and naive as they were, did the only thing they could think of. They gave their soul to Des to bring her lifeless body back to life. And it worked. Almost. A human soul is much more powerful than a monster's soul. This is true even in Deltarune, as only we can seal the fountains. And as we know from Undertale, when a monster gains a human soul, they change into something terrifying, something powerful, something else. Kris's last desperate attempt to save Des worked. But at what cost? Combined with Kris's soul, Des's body became a beast, the two halves of each forming the Roaring Knight, an entity born of a single desire, held by two disparate souls. To find Des's soul and to be reunited with her by any means necessary. Kris narrowly escaped with their life, albeit losing their soul in the process, and the experience has traumatized them ever since. That is how the knight can resemble both characters without fully being either. That is how it can be a what rather than a who. That is why it's more than a mere monster, but rather a sentient being with motives all their own. And that's what I love about the Cursed Knight theory. It fits the facts of the case the smoothest, in my opinion, both explaining the Lost Girl and the Knight's relationship to Kris and the disappearance. More importantly, I think that on a purely thematic and literary standpoint, it blows the game wide open. Here are just a few reasons why. When it comes to themes in Deltarune, there are a ton, but there's one I want to focus on for today, which is the theme of imbalance. The game's entire narrative kicks off with a new dark fountain being created, causing an imbalance between the light and dark worlds. The game has explored this in other avenues as well, especially with Ralsei and Susie. Ralsei starts off not caring about himself, other Darkners, or the Dark Worlds in general, but over time he has started to, without even realizing it, overcome this imbalance in himself by starting to care about things including himself. Susie, on the other hand, has been slipping, intentionally moving away from all of her connections to the light world besides Noelle, going so far as to begin living her entire life in Castletown. Imbalance is also a subtle yet important recurring theme in Chapter 5 specifically, revealed especially clearly in Asgore's 7 colored flowers. Each one of them is supposed to represent a specific trait, yet not a single one of them fully embodies their respective trait. Aqua is impatient. Seth lacks the stamina to persevere. Yellow wouldn't know justice if it hid in his boot and bit him. Blue is a kleptomaniac who often ignores the desires of others to satisfy his own. Green is petty and badgers people to pay back their loans in full. And Orange is a coward who hides behind paper walls. This is not me saying I don't like these characters. I love them all, and they all did grow in their own small ways throughout the chapter. The point I'm trying to make is that they're all imbalanced, unable to fulfill their given traits. This lack of balance is further highlighted by a strange recurring element that only a game like Deltarune could explore. Mismatched, imbalanced relationships between a body and a soul. This has happened 2.5 times in the game so far. The first pair is Kris and us, the second is the Mew Mew doll and the Lightner ghost, and the half is Spamton Neo, inhabiting the body of a Lightner's lost dream. Interestingly, each of these characters explores a different kind of mismatched relationship with different results. Kris and us can't seem to be on the same side of anything, acting more like Tom and Jerry than Ratatouille's Remy and Linguini, which was actually referenced in Chapter 5, by the way. Mew Mew and the Lightner Ghost initially seemed to be in a similar boat to us and Kris, but their entire fight is them learning to love and respect each other's wishes so they can live together. Spamton gets the worst of it, being wholly overpowered and shackled by the lost dreams of the Lightner that designed the Neo body, Metaton. 3 different examples, all with different results, but why bring this up? My reasoning is simple. I believe all of these characters are foreshadowing a 4th example of this, the Roaring Knight. If my theory is true, then the Roaring Knight is also a duality, but with an important difference. Unlike the others, the Roaring Knight is wholly united in purpose by the very nature of its creation. So much so that it's willing to do anything to accomplish its goal. Killing Tenna and attempting to kidnap Toriel sounds like a very unreasonable thing for Kris or December to do. And that's the scary part about it. This is showing another perspective on duality. Both sides are so focused on their shared goal that they can't keep the other in check. They're blinded to everything else. The exact thing Gerson warns us about in Chapter 4. Even beyond thematics, there are a ton of literary strokes and narrative beats in Deltarune that this Cursed Knight theory satisfies. Firstly, it pays off the obvious ties to deaths that a casual player might piece together, without discarding the Lost Girl narrative that's been developing in the background, in the places only the more ravenous Deltarune fans would think to look. Secondly, it explains the strange consistencies between the Dark Worlds created by the Knight and the ones made by Kris. If each fountain reflects the will of its creator, then it's strange that so many factors are the same between them. Things like which objects become items, running gags like the original,
Starwalker,
area design, and the overall comedic tone the various characters embody imply a strong connection between these two fountain creators. The clear example is Kris's Garden of Hopes and Dreams, which is intentionally similar to the Knight's Field of Hopes and Dreams. Interestingly enough, the one time this isn't true is the Second Sanctuary, which is the only Dark World so far in which Starwalker isn't compatible, and is the only one not made by Kris or the Knight. Thirdly, it explains how Gerson could exist in the way that he does in the first and third sanctuaries. The Knight is still partly Des, who most likely had him as a teacher before he passed. Seeing him as a wise mentor figure doesn't fit other Knight candidates like Rudy or Carol, but it fits Des perfectly. Fourthly, it actually gives the Roaring Knight a motivation. If the Knight is actively trying to find Des's stolen or lost soul, it explains why they keep opening dark fountains without actually starting the roaring. They're searching the dark worlds for the soul. Additionally, it explains why Carol and Kris are actively working with the Knight. They're all after the same thing, after all. Carol wants nothing more than to get Des back, and Kris wants to make amends for the past failures. This is really important, as I feel like the average Des Knight theory misses the motivation factor entirely. We have no indication that she's this evil mastermind who wants to end the world, so there must be some other factor in play that explains why she would do what she does. Fifthly, it explains the absolute panic attack Kris has during the night fight. Seriously, read the flavor text before most attacks. The game makes it very clear that this situation is stressing them out to the nth degree. It also explains why they hold back. After all, the night is the living proof of their worst mistake. The thing that keeps them under Carol's thumb, the thing that keeps them a puppet on a string, and the part of them that they fear they may never reunite with again. Only when their friends are in actual danger do they snap out of it. Sixthly, I think this fully ties together the connections between the dreamers, the holidays, and the night in a satisfying way. A relatively newer night theory that's similar to mine in concept explains the night as a combination of Kris and Noelle from the Weird Route, who have come back through time as the Roaring Night. While this theory does explain the Roaring Night's similarities to Kris and a holiday, I simply think that the theory went a little too far and got the wrong holiday. Firstly, as far as we know, time travel doesn't actually exist in Deltarune, and even if it did, the existence of the Weird Route Crisel Night implies that the player inevitably plays the Weird Route, which most casual players either won't discover or won't do. Plus, having a major antagonist's origins explained only in the messed up evil route doesn't make for very good writing, at least in my opinion. My theory works with evidence found within the main text of the game, which is why I think it fits better. But those are just a few examples that came to my mind as I pondered on my Cursed Night theory. I'm sure there's plenty of things that I missed or didn't consider, but that's part of the fun with Deltarune theorizing. There's so much depth in the text itself that even a truck freak like myself will always miss something or another. So I want to know, what do you guys think? Are you guys Cursed Night believers as much as I am, or do you believe another candidate to be stronger? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for sticking this out to the end. I really appreciate your support. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you all. Love you. Bye.